Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're digging into something our sources call a cheek-by-jowl relationship. It's a really evocative phrase.
It is, isn't it?
You might think history is, neatly divided, us versus them. But this term, used for the interactions between Muslims and the British in colonial India, well, it paints a much more complex picture, more intertwined.
Absolutely. It captures that closeness, but also the tension. Our sources really emphasize this mix of admiration sometimes, but also deep fear and resentment. It shaped everything back then.
Definitely not black and white.
Not at all.
So our mission today is to explore how education became this fascinating, sometimes really difficult bridge between these groups.
Yeah, a bridge and sometimes a battleground.
Exactly. We'll unpack how these interactions shaped knowledge, identity, and kicked off reform movements that, we still feel the effects of today.
We're going to look at how different communities reacted, how they resisted, how they reshaped education under colonial rule. It's a story of adaptation, but also profound resistance.
Right. And hopefully you'll get some surprising facts, those aha moments that connect the dots on this really pivotal time. We'll see how education was used for control, yes, but also for upliftment, and as this arena where identity was fought over.
It's that constant push and pull that's so fascinating.
Okay, so let's start before things got quite so complicated. Before the British really took hold, what did Muslim education look like in India? What were the foundations?
Well, before the British became dominant, Muslim education was actually thriving. It had a pretty robust system, even if it wasn't centralized like a modern system.
Okay.
You had moktabs, which were like primary schools. You had mosques, khanqahs, those are Sufi centers, and of course madrasas for higher learning. Even private homes were centers of knowledge. It was deeply embedded in society.
And our sources keep mentioning the Mughal period, roughly 1526 to 1858, as a kind of golden age for the madrasas. What made it golden?
Yeah, golden age comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Several things fueled this. You had strong support from the rulers. Royal patronage was key. There was relative political stability across large parts of the empire, a decent central bureaucracy, and crucially, the ulama, the religious scholars, and the Sufi mystics held significant influence. They were the dominant religious leaders, and education was central to their work.
So the state, the rulers, they really valued it.
Absolutely. They provided grants, land, support, and it wasn't just top-down. There was real backing from ordinary people, too.
What about the curriculum? What were students actually learning? And did different rulers, like Akbar versus Aurangzeb, have different ideas about it?
The curriculum generally focused on mankulat, that's revealed knowledge, things directly from the Quran and Hadith. But importantly, maklat, the rational sciences like logic, philosophy, mathematics, they also had a respected place.
So a mix.
A mix, yes. And rulers definitely shaped it. Akbar, for instance, reigning in the late 16th century, he brought in some strikingly inclusive reforms. Well, he opened madrasas to both Hindus and Muslims. He updated the syllabus to include things like ethics, math, astronomy, even medicine and agriculture. And he pushed for learning by practice, not just rote memorization. Pretty forward-thinking for the time.
Wow, yeah, that does sound progressive. But then Aurangzeb, later on, he was different.
He was. Aurangzeb, ruling from the mid-17th century, was much more traditional, more focused on what he saw as the true faith.
Okay.
He established a lot of masjids and madrasas, which was significant support in itself, and he famously patronized the Faragi Mahal Madrasa in Lucknow. That became a really celebrated center of learning.
Right, Faragi Mahal, that's where the Dars-e-Nizami curriculum was modified, wasn't it? What
Yeah.
was distinctive about that?
Exactly. Mullah Nizamuddin Sihawi adapted the Dars-e-Nizami there. Its big focus was on the rational sciences, logic, philosophy, jurisprudence. It really aimed to encourage critical thinking, help students grasp concepts quickly, and be flexible in legal matters.
Interesting. But not everyone went that route.
No, definitely not. You had contrasting approaches. Shah Waliul's Madrasa Rahimia, for example, really doubled down on the Mankilat, the revealed knowledge, and actively opposed what they saw as problematic modern religious ideas. So even then, you see different streams of thought.
That's a key point, the diversity, even before the British impact. And speaking of unifying forces, what about the Urdu language? Our sources mention its origins.
Urdu. Yeah, it's fascinating. The common understanding is that it comes from the Turkish word Urdu, meaning army.
Army.
Yeah, it basically emerged as a practical language to help communication within the military camps, which had this diverse mix of Indian soldiers and foreign troops. It became a lingua franca, a unifying force in that context.
Okay, so we have this rich, complex educational scene. Now let's bring in the British East India Company. They started as traders, but that changed pretty fast.
It really did. They arrived focused on commerce, on trade. But after key events, especially the Battle of Plassey in 1757, their role shifted dramatically. They became a major political power, controlling territory, controlling revenue.
And that set the stage for big changes.
Huge changes across everything, including education.
And then came the 1857 rebellion. Our sources say that really hardened British attitudes, especially towards Muslims.
Oh, absolutely. 1857 was a watershed moment. It provoked a brutal response from the British, and they increasingly viewed Muslims with suspicion, associating them with disloyalty.
So there were real consequences.
Dire consequences. Muslim lives, property, honor, all were at risk. And specifically targeting education, Muslim educational and religious institutions, particularly in places like Delhi, were devastated. This created this urgent sense of needing to protect their identity, their culture, from what felt like an onslaught.
Which leads us straight into Lord Macaulay's famous Minute on Education in 1835. What was the core idea there? What were they trying to achieve?
Macaulay's Minute is, well, infamous for a reason. His goal was crystal clear. He famously said they needed to create a class of persons, Indian in blood and color,
Yep.
but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect.
Yeah.
The explicit aim was to produce a class of intermediaries, people who could interpret between the British rulers and the Indian population, a loyal administrative class.
So this cheek by jowl idea wasn't just physical closeness. It was the British actively trying to get inside people's heads, shape their thinking.
Precisely. It's an ideological project as much as anything, and it had immediate practical impacts on traditional education.
How so? What happened to the madrasa graduates?
Well, a huge blow came in 1835 when Persian was replaced by English
Yeah.
as the language of the courts. One source calls this the first death knell of Indian linguistic identity.
Right.
Then you had Hardinge's proclamation offering government jobs specifically to English speakers. Suddenly, a traditional madrasa education, proficiency in Persian, it didn't get you anywhere in terms of government employment or advancement. Those doors slammed shut.
And this is what led to what the sources call educational dualism.
Exactly. This wasn't just about language choice. It actively created two separate tracks. Religion got pushed more into the private sphere. Madrasas were increasingly seen and funded, primarily for religious education only. Traditional schools lost state support, while Western-style English education got all the patronage. It created a hierarchy.
So it wasn't just different subjects, it was creating social divisions.
Absolutely. And for many Muslims, English education wasn't just neutral. They saw it as a threat to their faith, their culture. Some even saw it as a backdoor to Christianization.
That deep suspicion makes sense given the context. But did the British policy ever shift? What about the Hunter Commission in 1882?
Yes, there was a shift, or at least a course correction, with the Hunter Commission. By then, the British recognized, or were forced to recognize, just how far behind the Muslim community had fallen educationally.
So what did they recommend?
They suggested encouraging indigenous Muslim schools, but integrating secular subjects alongside religious ones. They proposed scholarships specifically for Muslim students, increasing the number of Muslim teachers, and even reserving some educational endowments for Muslims. It was an acknowledgement, maybe a bit late, that previous policies had been detrimental.
Okay, so that sets the stage for how the Muslim community itself responded. And Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and the Aligarh movement are impossible to ignore here. What was his core idea?
Sir Syed Ahmad Khan is such a towering figure. He saw Western scientific education as almost a panacea, his word for the backwardness and deprivation he saw among Muslims.
A panacea, strong word.
It was. He believed Muslims absolutely had to adapt, engage with modern Western knowledge, or they just fall further and further behind under British rule.
And his big contribution was the college.
Undoubtedly. Founding the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, MAO College, in 1875 was his landmark achievement. It later became Aligarh Muslim University, AMU.
Right.
The whole idea was to blend Western science with Islamic learning, to create a space for rational thinking, scientific inquiry, but within an Islamic context.
But he wasn't just focused on education, was he? He had broader reform goals.
No, definitely not just education. He actively challenged customs he saw as outdated, things holding the community back. He was constantly promoting rationality, trying to modernize social practices too.
And politically, the educational conference he started had major ripple effects.
That's right. He founded the All India Mohammedan Educational Conference in 1886. It was meant to promote modern education, held meetings every year, but its meeting in Dhaka in 1906, that's widely seen as the birthplace of the All India Muslim League. So education and politics were deeply linked.
Now, his views on women's education, they seem complicated, maybe even controversial.
They were, and still are, debated. It's complex. Initially, Sir Syed wasn't in favor of modern, Western-style education for women. He was operating in a very conservative climate.
Okay.
He kind of believed in this down-filtration theory, educate the men, make them modern, and that enlightenment would sort of trickle down to the women in the household.
Right, I've heard that argument.
But it's important to note, he wasn't against educating women in principle. He supported education at home, traditional learning. He even set up schools like the Zanana Madrasa for basic girls' education.
So what was his main objection?
He strongly warned against the government forcing a particular type of education or a uniform curriculum for boys and girls. He felt the government's model wasn't suitable for Indian girls and feared a conservative backlash if changes were imposed too quickly. So it was nuanced. Caution mixed with a belief in eventual progress, perhaps.
Okay, so Sir Syed represents this path of adaptation, of engaging with Western modernity, but that wasn't the only response. The Deobandi movement offered a stark contrast.
A very stark contrast. The Darul Uloom Deoband, founded in 1866, right after the trauma of 1857, was fundamentally a revivalist movement within Sunni Islam.
Revivalist meaning?
Meaning its main goal was to push back against non-Muslim cultural influence, British influence, secular ideas. They wanted to preserve traditional Islamic teachings, protect them from modernism.
How did their curriculum reflect that? What was their ideology?
They used a revised Derzi-Nizami syllabus, like Farangi Mahal, but with a very strong, unwavering emphasis on Maqulat, the revealed knowledge, Quran, Hadith, and Fiqh, Islamic law.
Less focus on the rational sciences than Farangi Mahal.
Definitely. They stressed spiritual awakening, political emancipation from the British, yes, but through adherence to tradition. They also explicitly rejected Shia traditions and many Sufi practices, which they saw as incorrect innovations. And crucially, they insisted on taqlid. That means following the established interpretations of respected religious scholars without necessarily demanding independent proof or reasoning. They believed the gates of jihad, independent reasoning, and reinterpretation were effectively closed. Stick to the precedents.
So, again, we see that cheek by jowl tension, but this time within the Muslim community. These deep divides over how to respond, how to define identity. Did Deoband have a political wing too?
Yes, very much so. Their Indian clerical wing, the Jamiat Ulema-e-Hind, formed in 1919, became a major player in the independence movement.
And their stance on independence.
Interestingly, they strongly advocated for composite nationalism. They pushed for a united front of Muslims and Hindus working together against British rule. That put them at odds with other Muslim political groups later on.
It's fascinating how these educational philosophies translated into different political strategies. Now, briefly, alongside Deoband, there were the Barelvis. How did they fit in?
Right, the Barelvi movement also emerged during this time. Like the Deobandis, they were traditionalists who strongly opposed colonial rule. But a key difference was their deep respect for Sufi saints and practices, which the Deobandis rejected.
Okay.
And politically, another major divergence. The Barelvis were notable supporters of the movement for a separate Muslim state, Pakistan, unlike the Deobandis' composite nationalism.
So many different currents. Was there anyone trying to sort of bridge these gaps between the Aligarh modernists and the Deobandi traditionalists?
Yes, there was an important attempt. The Nadwatul Ulema, founded in 1893. Its whole purpose was to try and reconcile these different educational philosophies.
How did they plan to do that?
Their goals were to reform the madrasa curriculum, try to unite the community, raise awareness of Muslim identity. And uniquely, they aimed to create a syllabus that embraced both traditional Islamic subjects and modern subjects, including English. They even tried to include Shia scholars, though that wasn't universally popular. It was a conscious effort to find a middle ground.
That sounds like a huge challenge. Beyond these big movements, were there smaller, more local efforts, grassroots initiatives?
Absolutely. A great example is the Anjumani Himayati Islam, the Society for the Support of Islam founded in Lahore in 1884.
What did they do?
This was really a middle-class organization working to uplift Muslims, using their own resources, building their own institutions. They set up lots of schools for boys and girls, including the first girls' school and high school in that region. They also established colleges, vocational training centers, Really practical stuff.
Impressive. How did they fund all this without state help?
They had some really clever fundraising methods. One famous one was the Muthi Bar Atta scheme, literally the handful of flour
A
scheme.
handful of flour.
Yeah. The idea was that every Muslim household would set aside just a small handful of flour each day before baking. Then volunteers would collect it weekly. It sounds small, but collectively it generated significant funds, a real community effort.
That's incredible. Community power in action.
It really was. And the Anjuman also advocated for Muslim political and social rights, eventually aligning itself with the Pakistan movement too.
Okay, let's fast forward now. We've seen the colonial impact, the diverse responses. What's the lasting legacy of all this, especially after independence and partition in 1947?
Well, the partition in 1947 had devastating consequences for Muslims who remained in India. A huge segment of the educated middle class, the professionals, the leaders, especially from North India, migrated to Pakistan.
So a brain drain, essentially.
A massive brain drain. It left the community in India severely depleted of its educated members, predominantly composed of artisans, laborers, people with lower literacy levels. And that has had a long shadow, contributing significantly to their continued educational backwardness in independent India.
And our sources indicate these problems haven't just disappeared. What are the ongoing challenges for Muslims in India regarding education?
Sadly, yes, many challenges persist. Our sources point to several things. There's the neglect of the Urdu language, which is the mother tongue for millions of Indian Muslims, in the mainstream school system. Muslim-managed educational institutions often report facing discrimination, difficulties getting recognition, funding. Curricula in state schools are sometimes seen as culturally biased, focusing heavily on Hindu traditions, which can make Muslim students feel alienated.
Right.
And unfortunately, in some parts of the community, conservative religious attitudes, that historical resistance to modern education we discussed, still hinder women's access to higher or modern education.
And wasn't there a major report on this, the Sachar Committee report in 2006?
Yes, the Sachar Committee report was a landmark. It officially documented the extent of the problem. It found Muslims were among the most educationally backward communities in India.
What did it identify as the main issues?
It talked about a double disadvantage. Not just low levels of enrollment and attainment, but also often poor quality of education in the schools they do access. It's a complex knot of issues.
Has the Indian government tried to address this? Have there been initiatives?
There have been efforts. Policies like the National Policy of Education back in 1986 tried to address minority education. More recently, following the Sachar report, one significant step has been formally linking madrasa education with the National Institute of Open Schooling, NIOS.
What's the goal of that linkage?
The idea is to help madrasas integrate modern subjects like science, math, social studies into their curriculum alongside religious studies, and to provide government-recognized certification. This could hopefully open up more pathways for madrasa graduates into higher education and employment.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to Bangladesh. The Qawmi madrasas there are linked to Deoband, right? How do they operate?
Yes, the Qawmi madrasas in Bangladesh are direct descendants of the Deobandi tradition. They operate with considerable autonomy, largely outside direct government control. They rely heavily on community support public donations, zakat, which is the obligatory Islamic charity, other contributions. And a key aspect is that they generally provide free education, food, and lodging for students. It continues that tradition of independent, community-funded Islamic learning.
Have they stayed strictly traditional or have they adapted over time?
Oh, they've definitely adapted in some significant ways. After Bangladesh became independent in 1971, many switched their primary language of instruction from Urdu to Bengali.
That makes sense.
They've also incorporated some English and mathematics, especially at the primary levels. And perhaps the biggest adaptation recently, the Bangladeshi government granted recognition to the top Qawmi degree, the Dara degree.
Recognition as what?
As equivalent to a master's degree in Islamic studies or Arabic from a state university. That's a huge deal for graduates. It potentially opens up many more professional avenues for them in the mainstream job market, government jobs, teaching positions, etc.
That must be a real game changer. But are there still debates about their curriculum, about modernization?
Yes, absolutely. There are ongoing, quite vigorous discussions within the Qawmi system and with the government about how to further align the curriculum with, contemporary needs and teaching methods.
What's the goal there?
The goal is tricky. How to equip students with more modern skills, make them more competitive in the wider economy, without compromising their core religious principles and the traditional Islamic knowledge base. It's that constant negotiation between tradition and modernity playing out again.
What an absolutely incredible, complex journey we've traced today. From that ogle golden age, through the intense pressures of colonialism, and into this whole spectrum of responses, adaptation, reform, resistance, preservation.
It really highlights how that cheek-by-jowl relationship wasn't just external between the British and Muslims, it was internal too. Communities grappling with massive change, with different ideas about the best paths forward, about what knowledge mattered most, about identity itself.
You see these divergent paths, these intense debates, all stemming from trying to navigate this new, often hostile world created by colonial rule and then dealing with the aftermath.
Exactly. The legacy is multifaceted and still very much alive.
So, thinking about everything we've discussed, these different educational philosophies, the historical clashes, the adaptations, the ongoing challenges, here's a final thought for you, our listeners. What does this complicated legacy mean for shaping identity, for creating opportunity, and for community dialogue across South Asia today?